I hope everyone is well. I'm going to be reviewing section 4 today on the Black Death and its literary aftermath. Before I do that, I want to mention the exam next Wednesday, December 9th. We'll have our final exam for World History class. In a way, these past few months went very slow, but in another way, they went very fast. So that time is here, final exam time. But you don't have to worry about this class and your final exam. Hope you don't have to worry about any of your classes. That's the least thing that anybody needs right now is worry. But next week, as I mentioned in the other video, on Monday, your final exam has already been loaded into Pearson Revel, and it will populate for you. It will pop up. It will be available. I'll make it available on December 9th on that day during class. So what's going to happen is, let me back up to next Monday, December 7th. We're going to have a live meeting through Google Meet. I'll send each of you an invite link to use Google Meet, and we're going to do a takeaway, meaning usually at the end of a class, I'll spend some time with the students asking them what their takeaway from the class is for this semester. Your favorite chapter or something that stood out to you, what you really liked, things like that, what you learned, if I hadn't said that already. And then I'm going to go over the exam again. There are going to be 3 essay questions. You get to choose 2 essay questions. Each essay question is worth 50 points. So once you choose 2 questions, you have to respond to those. And in Pearson Revel, when I assign the exam on Wednesday, December 9th, I'm going to assign it at 4 o'clock. So between the hours of 4 and 5:30, you need to complete the exam and submit it as if you were in the classroom. So during our regularly scheduled class hour, you'll need to log in and work on that exam and submit it into Pearson Revel. If it's late, then you have points off. So make sure you submit it. And like I said, you're responding to 2 questions from chapter 13, ironically. At least you have the videos if you need to review. There is also a rubric that's attached to the assignment, and you will see it when you pull it up in Pearson Revel. You'll see the rubric, so make sure you pay attention to that. It's mechanics 10%, writing style organization 30%, and ideas 60%. And it's very simple rubric, very simple. I didn't go all English professor on you. I saved that for my English classes. But so this is just basic. Okay, so I'm going to keep hitting that exam. Next Monday, I'll talk a little more, or I'll just repeat what I just said when we're all together in the classroom during the Google Meet. So in section 1, it talked about Tuscany and Florence, the 2 major cities at that time in the 1300s, late 1200s, early 1300s in Italy. They were both vying to be number 1. They were both sources of commerce and literature and art. And we saw the birth of some different writing styles. I remember the birth of the vulgar vernacular, where Dante created that writing style, this new writing style, and vulgar meaning common language. And those artists wanting to expand their literature, out from the educated, wealthy community into the hands of the common people. So they began to write in the language of the everyday person in the streets, basically. So, and I wonder if that's where we got the term sign from, also. Today, I'm going to focus on section 4, the Black Death and its literary aftermath. So I'll go through this really quick for you. Before I start, let me say that the Black Death, or the plague, most people say the plague. And when people say the plague, it used to mean the Black Death. But now these days, when people say the plague, they're, kind of talking about the, what, I'm not even going to mention it right now because I want to stay positive. But the Black Death, it was what they called an egalitarian disease. The word egalitarian means it wasn't, it didn't discriminate. It was equal opportunity in terms of affecting everyone. Man, woman, child, any age, any ethnicity. It wasn't a plague that was just akin or kin to one race or ethnic group. It hit everybody. That's what egalitarian means. It was equal opportunity. Everyone was impacted by the Black Death, the plague. And I believe that it killed about 25 million people. That's a lot in Europe. That's a lot for back then and now. Oh my goodness, can you imagine? So, okay, if you have your Pearson Revel up, I hope you have it up by now. I'm going to jump over, I'm going to just jump over to the PowerPoint. I'm going to share that with you for a moment to look at a few things. So here we have this first slide, the Black Death and its literary aftermath. Europe suffered from overpopulation, famine, drastic weather, and now plague. Massive loss of life, and there's the word egalitarian disease. I explained what egalitarian meant. The impact of Black Death on popular imagination, flagellance, atonement, anti-Semitism, pogroms. What does that mean? Well, we're going to look at that here as we go through the book. But yeah, flagellance, atonement. Some people began to think that it was God, punishing them. People began to think that they had sinned. Maybe the city had sinned or the country had sinned. So, and that they needed to make atonement because they were being punished for it. There comes the anti-Semitism again. People blame the Jews. It's Jews. It's the Jews. So that's what it means by popular imagination. People's minds began to go wild. And sound familiar? Yeah, we can see that if we look back on the past several months in our own country, in our own state, how people began to do the same thing. Their imaginations began to run wild and they began to blame all kinds of people for corona. And there was an incident in Texas around May where a Chinese family was attacked because people thought it's a Chinese thing or something. And that was unfair and cruel. But a person's imagination begins to run wild. And people were doing the same thing. They were thinking it was a judgment from God and it was a punishment for sin and things like that. And then it says here, psychological effects, doubt in divine justice, obsession with death. Yeah, that can happen. I think I see that in my younger students, their obsession with death. Then let's go down here to where it says the spread of the Black Death. So from 1347 to 1350, 3 years. It wiped out 30 to 50% of Europe's population, and there's the number, about 25 million people died of the bubonic plague. We go down one more slide. From the Museum of Modern Art. Okay. All right, I'm going to switch back over here. I'm going to pause there for a moment. Okay. So let's get to our quiz questions. Yeah, How did the vernacular style continue to develop after the Black Death? In 1316 and 1317, not long before Dante's death, crop failures across Europe resulted in the greatest famine the continent had ever known. For two summers, the sun rarely shined. Furthermore, between 1000 and 1300, the continent's population had doubled to a point where it probably exceeded its ability to feed itself. Even in the best of times, in these dark years, which were followed by a century-long cooling period, marked by too much rain to allow for good grain harvests, common people were lucky to eat, let alone eat well. That's a sad, sad, sad situation. Then, here come the rats. In December 1347, rats infested with fleas, carrion bubonic plague, arrived on the island of Sicily. They were carried on 4 Genoese ships that had set sail from Caffa, a Genoese trading center on the Black Sea. So rats infested with fleas. Okay. Within months, the disease spread northward through the ports of Venice, Genoa, and Pisa across Italy, southern France, and eastern Spain. The disease began in the lymph glands of the groin or armpits, which slowly filled with pus and turned black. The inflammations were called buboes, hence the name bubonic plague. And their black color lent the plague its other name, the Black Death. I wanted to read that so that there's always someone out there going, I wonder where the name the Black Death came from. Or bubonic. What does bubonic mean? So there you go. There's something I was going to say. I was reading an article several months ago about homelessness in San Francisco and how it had gotten so bad that it had reached, they were concerned, the CDC was concerned about, and actually this was probably this time last year when I was reading that article, it was before Corona, but they were concerned because of the rats and the fleas that were biting people and spreading fleas to all of the people who were homeless, and it was just out of control. So this makes me think of that. Okay, so on page, not page, for me it's page, but you it's not. In that first section of the Black Death, we have our first quiz question. It says the term pogrom, P-O-G-R-O-M, refers to what? And here it says, let me see here. About 6 paragraphs down, the paragraphs are rather long in this first section, you'll see the word pogroms, it's in black bold. And there it talks about the massacre of the Jews. That's what it's referring to. Yes. And it says here, let's see. The need to find a scapegoat for the plague spurred on the general population, but it seems likely that officials and city leaders, well aware that the Jews were being blamed for something they had nothing to do with, allowed these massacres of the Jews, these pogroms, to occur as a way to eliminate their own personal debts. Do you hear that? To eliminate their own personal debts and capture Jewish wealth for themselves. Sound familiar? 1940s, 1930s in Germany during the Nazi regime. So, yeah, so there's your first quiz question. Your second quiz question, if you hit your arrow and go over to the next topic that says literature after the Black Death, Boccaccio's Decameron. It says Boccaccio's title, Decameron, means, that's your second quiz question, and there's your response right there. The Decameron, or Work of 10 Days, is a collection of framed prose framed prose tales in the manner of the 1001 Nights, or Arabian Nights is another name for that. The Florentine writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the plague, sets the stage for the 100 prose stories of the collection with a startling, direct description of Florence in the ravages of the disease. That was the book that I was showing in the picture on the PowerPoint, the last slide that before we jump back over to look up the quiz questions. But that was the picture that was of that book. I would love to read that book. I always say that every time I look at this. I would love to read that book. Okay, so let's see. Quiz question number 3. Let me have my bearings here. 1, 2. Three, yes. Sorry about that. Okay, let's see. Move over to the next topic in this section called Petrarch. Petrarch's sonnets. It may be Petrarch's, but his sonnets. Right underneath that, it asks, why did Petrarch become known as the father of humanism? Now, the response is very obscure. Very obscure. Excuse me. So it's not worded. The response is not worded where you would recognize it in one of your answer choices. So if you look in this section, like the first 3 paragraphs, it talks a lot about Petrarch and how he tried to save so much of the literature. It says here, he studied at Montpellier and Boulogne and traveled throughout northern France, Germany, and Italy. He was always in search of manuscripts that preserved the priceless literary works of antiquity, copying those that he could not pry loose from monastic libraries. When you went in the monasteries, you could read the books, but you could not take them out. You couldn't check them out. Kind of like that section, you know, in the libraries, the research libraries on university campuses or college campuses. You can go in and you can look at them, but you can't check them out. All the monasteries, they had books, but you could read, but you could not leave. So what he would do is he spent his lifetime going into monasteries and other places, sitting down and copying those manuscripts because he wanted to preserve them. As he wrote to a friend in 1351, these manuscripts in a classical Latin and hard for monks to decipher were in danger of being lost forever. As a matter of fact, there's I remember someone sharing the account of someone who went to a monastery. This is, let's see, they went to a monastery and they saw the monks, they saw scrolls and scrolls and scrolls, many scrolls, and they looked and they saw the monks that were burning these. This was during a dire time for heat. It was a monastery that was way up in them, set apart from the cities, and they were burning these scrolls, you know, for heat. And when the person went over and looked at these scrolls, they noticed that they were scrolls written by the disciples, some of the disciples of Jesus Christ. And they didn't realize what they were burning because they didn't know, they couldn't read them. So this person rescued them, those scrolls, but they had burned so many of them, you know, just how big the Bible would have been, you know, if they hadn't burned all those. But still, when people don't understand it, there's no appreciation for it, and they tend to destroy it. So, but Petrarch, he saved many of those works, and that's what he dedicated his life to. So he was considered a humanist, and like I said, they don't say that, but that's what Your response basically that they're looking for, why did Petrarch become known as the father of humanism? And the response is he was devoted to preserving the literary works of antiquity. Okay, number 4. I do want to read this though, because it's very interesting to me. How in that same section, a few paragraphs down, it says the majority of Petrarch's verses to Laura, the love of his life, take the form of the Italian sonnet, known also as the Petrarchan sonnet, because he perfected the form. He perfected the form. When people talk about sonnets today, they talk about Shakespeare. They always come back to Shakespeare when it comes to sonnets. They say, oh, nobody does a sonnet like Shakespeare. And I say, that's not true. Well, I don't know. I'm partial to Shakespeare, but Petrarch was the one who perfected the sonnet, and he influenced Shakespeare. So just wanted to, give some credit there to Petrarch. Okay. And it says such poems would have a lasting influence, especially in the poetry of the English Elizabethan age, which was the age of Shakespeare, that Elizabethan age, because they seem to capture all the emotional turbulence of love. And that's what it's all about. And then it goes down to talk about Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. And all of this literature is being produced, mind you, during the Black Plague or the Black Death. Life did not stop. Selah, think on that. Life didn't stop. People kept going. People kept studying. People kept writing. People kept working. And it goes on to talk about Chaucer, which is our next quiz question. The Canterbury Tales is sometimes referred to as an estates satire. Estates satire because why? And and it says here, I believe right at the onset in this topic, under the topic Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, it says, along the same trade and pilgrimage routes that helped to make both Florence and Siena so wealthy, flowed the cultural innovation of both cities northward. The first Englishman to translate Petrarch was Geoffrey Chaucer. He was a middle-class servant and diplomat. Let's see. Okay. Here about, let's see, 1, 2, 3. The third paragraph, it says, Chaucer's characters come from all 3 estates or social ranks. That's another word for social ranks. Estates, meaning the nobility, the clergy, and the common people. So he was one of those literary people who combined the classes. He didn't just focus on the wealthy. He didn't just focus on the poor like Dickens. Dickens was all of his, to me, I'm not a big Charles Dickens fan. Some of you may be, but I think I tend to, be really hard on Dickens. I think if you read one, you've read them all. Not all. A Tale of Two Cities is unique. Anyway. But yeah, but in all Dickens, literature, he focuses on that poor person who just can't ever get ahead. But whereas Chaucer has all people from all estates, all social levels get in his works. So it says the Canterbury Tales is sometimes referred to as an estate satire because, and your response is, characters come from all social classes or estates. Okay, now on to the last quiz question. Okay, so if you go over to the next topic header in this section, it says women, not evolving English, but where it says women in late medieval society. It says the 7 women in Boccaccio's Decameron and characters like Chaucer's wife of Bath represent the increasing social prominence of women in medieval society. This is no doubt, at least in part, a reflection of the growing role of the Virgin Mary in medieval religious life, and her prominence helped raise the dignity of women in general. That's pretty cool. And then it goes down to say women in Boccaccio and Chaucer. Neither Boccaccio nor Chaucer could ever be called a feminist. In fact, both depict misogynistic characters, but both do recognize these new women as real forces in contemporary social life. So are they saying they felt threatened by their image? Interesting. Maybe that's me. Chaucer's women leave prevalent and prescriptive views of women's proper roles far behind. Boccaccio's story of Philippa, told by Philostrata on the 6th day of the story sequence of Decameron, is another case in point. I'm going to jump over here. Okay. Goes down to talk about, oh yes, down here in the next section, little topic header, Christine de Pizan, or Pizan. I'm not sure if it's Pizan or Pizan, but Christine de Pizan, an early feminist. By the late 14th century, women began to play an increasingly active role in the courts of Europe. So it goes on to talk about Christine and how she has gradually established her reputation as a writer, working as a copyist and an illustrator. Her first successes were books of poems and ballads. Down at the bottom of this paragraph, it says, her city's queen, in one of her stories, her city's queen is the Virgin Mary herself, a figure whose importance confirms the centrality of women to Christianity. Thus, she opens the book by wondering why men are so inclined to demean women. And yet we're still asking that question today. So Christine Pizan turns to God for guidance and has a vision. And in her dream, there's a picture that I'm going to turn to in the PowerPoint, because herein lies your answer. We go down to this picture here. On the left stands Christine de Pizan, engaged in composition while receiving the visit of reason, honesty, and justice. On the right, Christine and one of the royal ladies build the ideal city. Think on that. That's very interesting. So I'm going to stop sharing and go back to our video. So your last quiz question is, in this image, reason, honesty, and justice represent what? And the response it's looking for is here. Well, I'm going to read it. Guides through debate who help to shape the author's position towards her subject. So reason, honesty, and justice represent guides. They're her guides. They show up in her dream, and they're there to help guide her through debate, help her discuss and shape the author's position towards her subject. Okay. And in the last of this section, it goes on to talk about the 100 Years' War, Christine de Pizan, and Joan of Arc, which is so interesting. And writing, I think it was right before Christine died or right after she died, or right before she died is when Joan of Arc, even more damaging to the masculine tradition was the fact that was Joan of Arc, a 17-year-old peasant girl who approached the French king and begged him to allow her to obey the voices of the saints, who ordered her to drive the English out of France. But Christine was even inspired. She had retired by then to an abbey, but she was inspired by Joan of Arc. Unfortunately, she died, unfortunately, before Joan of Arc was burned at the stake. But yeah, Joan of Arc was 17 years old. Okay, so that's section 3. And I will send everyone a Google Meet link to join the takeaway session on Monday at 4 o'clock. And then your exam will be on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. All right, for now, stay safe, everyone. Blessings.